Alicia Kearns. I'm so pleased we're doing this interview. I've wanted to meet you and interview you for ages, so thank you.
No, absolutely fine.
So, I read that your parents were lefties.
They were.
How did they react when you became a Tory?
So it's really interesting. So I grew up in a household that was very left-wing. So my father was involved in Irish politics. They met in East Berlin, where my dad had just been travelling around the USSR. My mum was learning German, and they fell in love through politics. They moved back to the UK. So it was very romantic, actually. So my mum's last day in Germany was my dad's first, and he flew home with her to England the next day because they were so sure that this was to be. And then they lived in a squat in Birmingham where they were very left-wing and doing lots of politics and, very different. But the main thing they brought me up with was that in politics you should never hate. You can intensely dislike, you can disagree, but we have to have more dialogue in politics. And so I went on this journey, and I think it's really important that we accept that people can change their politics and come to their politics. And actually, the courage it takes to come out and say, I'm going to reject everything I was raised with because actually I've realised this isn't my journey. And it was when I was working in the civil service, and I went into the civil service thinking I was a Labour voter, and prisoner voting was the first turning point. And for me, it was that realisation that if you have hurt our society, you have no right to have a say. Once you've come out and you've been rehabilitated, of course you get full citizens' rights back. But while you're in prison, no. And it was this gradual journey, and having to take friends out and tell them that I changed my politics and tell my parents. I'd actually lost my dad by then because I lost him when I was 18. But my mum has never, even for a moment, hesitated to support me entirely because she said, I know you want to make a difference and I know you're going into it for the right reasons. And she has also gone on a political journey because she really struggled, particularly under Corbynism, to continue to support the Labour Party.
Wow. What's the impact of losing your dad when you were 18?
It changed everything. And I don't think you ever get over it. And I really struggle. He had a stroke out of nowhere, and my mum was abroad. So I was left to deal with all the medical care until she was able to get back. And my family upbringing again, my dad was the house husband, my mum worked. So he was my person that plaited my hair every morning and looked after me. And it broke me for many years. And for me, there's a numbness to me on a daily basis where I do feel like I have lost the ability to feel happiness in some extent because they were everything and he was my best friend. And I really struggle with it. But I think also that empathy and knowing what it's like. We lost everything when my dad died. His life insurance ran out while he was in a coma. So we had to sell our house, we had to sell our belongings. It was a complete change to our life. That allows you to have that more compassion for people because you understand some extent the trauma that can happen. But you never get over that grief. It just doesn't go away.
Indeed. Now let's talk about what you're doing now. So you are the first woman and the youngest ever chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. You beat Tory grandees in that election. It's an internal election. Indon Smith wanted the job, Liam Fox wanted the job, your colleagues, of course. So you are a trailblazer in a male-dominated world of foreign affairs.
It's very male. It's very, very male. Yeah.
What's it like to make history here?
It's a privilege, and look, I'm so grateful. And I was really pleased because I got over half the Conservative vote, which I thought was really important. I'm able to make a difference, and I think we all come to Parliament, as you know, with our different expertise and our different specialisms, and we fight for our constituencies. But there are also particular skill sets that you bring where you want to show that you can help make a difference. And it means everything to me to be able to do this. And what's really nice is over the weekend, we had some really difficult news stories around Israel and the reforms taking place there and relationships in the Middle East peace process. And the amount of colleagues who came up to me and said, I'm so proud I backed you because you've shown that in the way that you're representing Parliament. I'm really proud and grateful, and I'm loving it. So I'm really grateful.
That's good to hear.
Yeah.
Wanted to ask you about something that you said. We're walking around with things in our pockets that are taking our data. Can you tell me what are we walking around with that's worrying you? What data is being taken? Why? Who by? For what purpose?
So the reality is we are under attack from authoritarian states on every single day. And post-COVID, the amount of apps that we were installing to go to different countries. So Qatar, I raised the flag about the fact that one of the apps they wanted everyone to download gave that app the ability to go into other apps you had, to steal your information, to switch on your phone without you having done it, to switch on recording on your phone without you having done it. COVID was the authoritarian regime's dream because everyone had to download technologies to track who they're interacting with. But we have a greater threat, which is China. And they are trying to build a tech totalitarian state. Now, the way you do that is by accumulating data. They need to suck in as much data as they can around the world. So exfiltrating our data is their priority alongside techno-authoritarianism, which is essentially the insertion of technologies into our lives where we become dependent and reliant on them. Because the more dependent we are as a country on China, the more castrated we are on the world stage. You cannot stand up to China if you are reliant on them for technologies, if they have your data, and if they've weaponized resources around the world. And so TikTok is a good example. When I started raising the flag, 18 months ago, I refused to ever go on the platform. People were like, what is this woman on about? It's just videos of cats and, elephants dancing. But the reality is, A, this is an app that the Chinese government doesn't want its own people on. That should give you a pause for thought. Secondly, we know now that TikTok employees access the data of British journalists to try and find out who their sources were. So we know that an individual's data can be found to find their locations to see who they're engaging with. Thirdly, we know that China discriminates against certain people and individuals in the algorithm. So if you're disabled or considered unattractive, you go further down the rankings. So imagine what they're doing politically. Imagine what they're capable of doing politically. And finally, the challenge is around the entire way in which we engage with TikTok, which is that it's undermining our critical thinking and our ability to challenge what's going on around us. And the reality is they are signed up to Article 6 of the Chinese National Security Law, which means that if the Chinese government asks for the data that TikTok has, they have to hand it over. And as we said, we've seen that they've illegally accessed data before. This is a major concern and it's in our pockets. And there are other apps doing that sort of activity. We have to have a national conversation on this.
Do you have a message to anybody who uses TikTok or perhaps parents of children who use TikTok?
So when I go in and speak to young people in schools, they ask me about this and they challenge me on it. And by the end of the conversation, they go, do you know what, actually, I think I'm going to come off it. We shouldn't be banning these things because we need to have a national conversation. But my message is, if you were an identity thief, TikTok is your dream. Because, for example, when everyone does those silly things like, what would be your porn star name? Yeah. And it's like, give TikTok your mother's maiden name and your pet's name. Those are also the most common things you use for your passwords to be restored. People are putting that out to the world. So as an identity thief, I now know your mother's maiden name, your pet name, but I also know where you spend your time, what your interests are, who your friends are, what your vulnerabilities are, the things you're interested in that you shouldn't be interested in. Now, for an identity thief, that's a dream. Imagine a hostile state that is trying to work out who you know that they can help undermine that individual because of the things you've put out online.
Really interesting. Now, I want to ask you about something that you wrote. You wrote a pamphlet with a number of your Conservative parliamentary colleagues. This was back in 2020, so about 3 years ago. And you said this: it is our duty to follow through on our pledge to increase the dignity, safety and privacy of transgender members of our society. Now, the trans debate has continued to rage.
Yeah.
What are you calling for? What needs to happen?
So I'm a libertarian. People should be free to live their lives as they want with as little government intervention as possible until you hurt someone, and then I will come down on you like a ton of bricks. This all came back from my argument that we need a conversion therapy bill. So if you are gay, this is not some malady condition where you need to be treated. You should be allowed to love who you want to love. It's about your private life and what you want to do. You're not hurting anyone else. The reason why I've included transgender people within my conversion therapy bill is that at this moment in this country, if you think you are trans, you deserve to have challenging support. But the options you currently have at the moment, unfortunately, the risks are, you either go to a quack who says you are absolutely trans without question, some hippy-dippy person who's going to push you down that path no matter what. Or you could go to someone who says there is no such thing as being trans, you are medically in need of treatment, you are wrong and we're going to make you ingest toxins and poisons and we're going to pray over you and do all these things that are completely wrong and dangerous to that person's mental health. What my bill calls for is that you are trans, you should have to see someone who is regulated and accredited. That's all I'm asking for, so that no one can either way put you at risk. I don't think that's a complicated thing to believe in. But I think what's really frustrating about the conversion therapy bill is that people have tried to manipulate it and use it for their own swords or issues that they want to raise. Let's focus on protecting the most vulnerable, and that should be our job. And, you know, and it's also fascinating how people say, well, if that's your position on transgender rights, then obviously that's your position on sports, that's your position on prisons. No, it's not. My position on prisons is very clear. Anyone, and I've been calling for this for years, if you've committed a sexually motivated or violent crime against women, you cannot be put in a prison with women, because the government's foremost duty is to keep people safe, and that includes those women in that prison. You know, the lack of nuance in this debate, we should be really ashamed of that. We need to make sure we're having a proper, legitimate debate.
Is the government backing
Yes, they are.
bill?
Yeah, so it should be coming forward the next couple of months.
Okay. You have a panic alarm in every single room of your house. Why?
I won't be the only MP. Look, there are MPs whose children are taken to school by the police every morning. There are colleagues who are told that they need police protection at all time in their own constituencies, who have stalkers, who have people outside their offices in balaclavas. And I was advised that I needed panic alarms in every room in my house because of death threats I've received, threats against my children, who are both under 4, and because of the interest in hostile states in trying to undermine me and hurt me. So that's why I was given that advice. And of course, you take the advice that's given to you by security experts.
I guess I became familiar with your name, and many other people would have done at the time of the moves to bring Boris Johnson down. And you were cited in media reports as the ringleader of a conspiracy to do that. You denied that. You continue to deny that. Do you think there was an element of sexism about how you were singled out as a ringleader during that period?
Without question, and those individuals responsible for that know who they are. I'll be completely transparent. There was a meeting in my office of a group of Conservative MPs. There had been other meetings and other days in other offices where we discussed whether or not Boris Johnson had let down the Conservative Party and let down the people of this country. It is incumbent on Conservative MPs to have that discussion, and I'm not ashamed of that. But was it briefed out to the media as a pork pie plot because they were worried about what we might be planning? Yes. But what's interesting is in the days that followed it, while I was in Ukraine, working on how do we support our friends in Ukraine, the only 2 people in the room briefed out against were Deanna Davison and me. The 2 women, the only 2 women in the room. They briefed out about her love life, which was shameful, and they briefed out against me, the Whip's office, that I was a bad mother because I'd taken my daughter with me to Ukraine. Now, my daughter came with me because she had to have brain surgery at a very young age, and I was still breastfeeding. It was perfectly safe to take my daughter to Ukraine at that time. But the fact that they did that, and that was the best they could find on me, was that I was a bad mother. I think there are some serious questions to be asked there about who made those decisions and why they thought that was at all appropriate.
That's a chilling end to the interview, actually. Thank you for explaining
thank you for having
that.
me.
There'll be some nervous whips there, and I'm so pleased that we finally got to do this interview.
No, and I should say the current Whip's office, I have to say, is a complete change in what I've seen in the past. And I'm very grateful to see such a grown-up approach to governance.
You have a great way of expressing yourself, and I was honestly hanging off every word during that interview. Alicia Kearns, thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.